Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Chrissy here from CS2. Today, I'm joined by Brianna Valleskey. She's the head of content at Inscribe. And I first met Brianna probably I was trying to think about Brianna like maybe 3 years ago at one of Women in Revenue's first events. And since then, have had the pleasure of working alongside her, producing content when she was at Sendoso. And thought it would be great to have Brianna on to talk about brand and the importance of building brand and how you measure that. And I think that that's a big topic right now across B2B marketers. And I think a lot of marketing ops folks are also like a little bit scratching their head and confused, like, how do I be a partner to my team that's creating content and building brand and helping them really see the insights that they need and report on it, and also what the value is. So thanks, Brianna, for joining us today.
Thank you, Chrissy. I am so excited to be here today, and it's great to be chatting with you. Especially, I know I've actually had you in some of our content at Sendoso, as you mentioned. You hosted one of our master classes, so it's exciting and awesome to be collaborating with you again and kind of be on the other end of it.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. Well, to kick it off, so I mentioned Brianna had worked at Sendoso, and when she was there, I was always just like really impressed by you, Brianna, and like the just the content machine, and even just being slotted into it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like just doing the master class was just really great, and the whole process was seamless. And I've always was a big fan of like the brand. And for full transparency, Sendoso is one of our clients, and so we got to see the back end too, of everything. But I just thought, ever since then, I'm like, okay, she gets it, she's got it. So to kick it off, I just want you to give a little bit about your background, because you have a really strong background in content and content creation and brand, and how you got into the world of that, and then also into the world of B2B.
Yeah, happy to. So my passion or obsession, like in life, is helping the world tell better stories. I am fascinated by and like have dedicated my career to really the art and the science of writing, of storytelling and content. I actually started my career in journalism, which is not too uncommon for content
Yeah.
marketers nowadays, but have spent the last decade or so in content production, marketing, strategy, mainly at B2B SaaS companies. I love startups. I have helped scale startups from seed to Series C and beyond, as well as worked with my own clients like locally, nationally, internationally. My tech experience kind of spans the gamut, actually, from recruiting tech and real estate tech to sales tech, martech, and even fintech.
Hmm.
And then, of course, as you mentioned, I was also recently the director of corporate marketing at Sendoso, which is a sending platform, and it's a little bit of martech and sales tech.
Mhm.
I am really energized by like helping companies grow through owning the market narrative and using brand to drive demand. And I actually just joined a company about 2 months ago called Inscribe as the head of content. As you mentioned, we help companies in the financial services industry go faster by automating document reviews and dramatically improving their fraud detection using artificial intelligence. So it's really exciting. And of course, as I mentioned, I'm excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, perfect. I think more and more as building out CS2, and our content just became like kind of natural. It's like, okay, well, I want to do a podcast. And then it took me like 2 years to convince Charlie like to do a podcast. And then we finally did it when I was like 10 months pregnant, which is like the worst time. But um, I, and most recently, I found that there's just so many benefits for a strong brand and
Hmm.
storytelling for a company. Um, I think one of those benefits is obviously, getting that like market visibility and like
Mm.
the telling the story, making sure that like the market understands like basically what you do and get bought into your brand, and it's very natural. It's not so much of this like barrier of understanding that. But then and then garnering fans, right? Like the value
Mhm.
of garnering fans, and garnering fans that are, you know, really supportive fans and really
Mm.
loyal fans, and just all the content like you produce resonates with them. Like I'm one of the I feel really strongly, I think Tim Ferriss talks about it, but it's like this having like 1,000 like fans
Yeah.
can like drive a business, especially if they're like really loyal fans, more than just maybe 10,000 like, people who are just watching your brand. And so, but then on the other side, I think it can really benefit hiring, which I think
Mm.
for right now,
Mhm.
I think in this like great resignation, I think a lot of people look at the brand for a company to see like, oh, is this the type of brand I want to work for? Or like,
Mhm.
is it really clear? Or, oh, they're thought leaders in their space. That's really interesting. I want to be part of that mission and so forth. So I want to hear from you really like what does brand recognition awareness mean to B2B marketers, and why do you think that they should care? Like what are the main benefits of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you just said about how brand is so critical for both, bringing in and keeping your customers, but also employees, because people want to be associated with products and services and companies that align with their values. And when you purchase a product, it's almost like integrating it, or join a company, you're integrating it into your identity as a person. So it's almost like a
Mm.
very personal choice. But when I take a step back and just think about brand awareness and recognition, at the very basic level, it's about letting people know that you exist and making sure that
Yeah.
they remember you, they remember what you do, how you're different, and why you matter. And then, I mean, brand awareness is how you bring leads and prospects and buyers and candidates into your,
Yeah.
sales or recruiting funnel. There's no demand generation without brand awareness. You can't help people understand why they want or need what you have to offer if you don't first put their brand, or put your brand, excuse me, into their consciousness. And then it also, I mean, brand is also kind of like a full life cycle function. It's not just about getting on their radar, it's about continually showing up. The mere exposure effect, it's the psychological phenomenon where people tend to develop like an affinity or preference for things just because they're familiar with them. It's also sometimes called the familiarity principle. So the more that people are
Mm.
actually exposed to your brand,
Yeah.
the more they'll favor it, which is cool because that means that like marketing is sort of backed by science. Or I think it's cool because I'm really nerdy and love science. But then, you don't need science to tell you that you want to buy from companies, brands, and people that you like. Once you've got brand
Yeah.
awareness, you can build that brand affinity that you started talking about too, by continuing to nurture relationships with people, so that when it comes to choosing between your competitor, you rise to the top. And then finally, even after you have customers, that's where brand loyalty comes into play. And,
Mhm.
and that's how you keep them as customers. So I mean, really, like I said, it's like brand marketing helps get people in the funnel, it moves them along, it converts them to customers, and really helps keep them with you in the long term.
Totally. One thing that I've noticed in B2B, and I think it's changing, but I think a lot of the times that people just think of brand as like, their logo, their
Yeah.
colors, their, just like these very like shallow things of like, this is what our website looks like. But there's a lot more to that. And I think the key thing that you're talking about is storytelling,
Mm,
and why that's really important. And like, really the brand is also the narrative behind it, like behind the
mhm.
brand. And in your experience with like different companies, especially startups, like where do you feel like they start to really understand and invest in their brand, and maybe also when do you think that they should do
Oof.
that?
Yeah, wow. I would say that you kind of tend to see two different schools of thought for startups,
Hmm.
where either they don't think about brand for a really long time,
Yeah.
or they're trying to invest in brand right away. And honestly, I mean, I don't ever think there's a one size fits all answer for any anything for anybody in life, first of all, but specifically for growing companies. I think whether you want to invest in your brand like at a specific stage really depends on the resources you have to bring that brand to life. So if you're an
Mm,
early stage startup and you don't have any marketing people yet, maybe it's not the best thing to try and invest in like a branding agency to like really build this amazing brand, because you just don't have those internal resources who can be fully dedicated to helping not just craft that, but as you mentioned with like how your podcast came to light, your brand should be very natural. It should come from
mhm.
who your company is, what your culture is, who your customers are, and what their lives are like, and what kind of feelings and emotions and personality and vibe they're going to gravitate towards. So I would say it depends on the resources that you have internally, and just also your strategy. Like if you're a very engineering focused company and you want to spend 4 years like getting your product right in stealth mode before you bring it to market, there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
But if you're also a company that feels like you have a really powerful story to tell, you're investing in marketing, you have those internal stakeholders who can be the sort of uh, sourcer, crafter, and guardian of that brand, then maybe that is the right decision for you. So I think that in and of itself is a very strategic decision that startups do have to make at an early stage.
Totally.
Mm.
What a I think before we get into, I want to hear some of the misconceptions on what brand is, but like before we get into that, what are some of the key activities that you think are kind of like a great place to start if you're looking to,
Mm.
and once you have your story, right? Like once you
Mhm.
have maybe developed brand, like what are some channels or activities that you can do to really promote that brand? And also, how does the company as a whole, like your employees, like how can they play a role in that? Because I think
Mm.
from my perspective, when I look at some other B2B brands, and I think it depends, right? Like on who you're targeting and like what your narrative is, but the ones where I see a lot of, employees that are engaging in the conversations or being ambassadors or like even customers being part of that, like I really feel like that feels kind of what you're saying, familiarity, because you just see
Mm.
it more often. But first, like what are some of the key activities that you think would be great to explore to help build upon that brand? And how can you also include employees or customers into that?
Yeah, yeah. Really good question. So brand channels, I usually like to start just thinking about super, super top of funnel, even pre-funnel, before
Mm,
someone fills out a form on your website. Things like PR. I know a lot of companies feel like it might be sort of I don't know, like an old school channel or activity to go after, but there is a
mhm,
ton of value in it, because that's one way that you can really disperse your story and get it out into the market. No, you're not going to get a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times placement every quarter, but there are a ton of trade publications, there are online blogs, there are podcasts where you can go on and really
mhm.
be the what's the thing in media? Oh God, please edit this on the podcast. um, there, there are a lot of there are a lot of trade publications, a lot of industry blogs, podcasts where you can go on and like be the town crier, be the evangelist for that
Yeah.
story that
Mhm,
you're trying to tell.
mhm,
And all of those placements have value. You never know when someone's going to pick up something. You usually get a pretty okay, juicy SEO backlink to your website from it, and then it also
mhm,
really allows you to utilize some of your other brand channels like social media to publish those news articles, because then it's showing
mhm,
like here's validation that other people want to hear from us and think that we have a valuable story to tell. So I think PR is definitely worth it. If you're not going to hire an actual internal PR person, don't be afraid to work with an agency, but do your due diligence that that agency is actually also going to put in the same amount of effort to understand your story, so they know when to reach out to reporters and what types of stories to engage with them in. So PR is a great place to start. Social media, of course, it's loud, it is noisy, but it is also, if your website is your digital storefront, then
mhm.
social media is your promoter handing out little placards telling people to come to your party. And it's a, I mean, obviously it doesn't cost anything. There are tools that can tell you like what your earned media value is for what you would need to pay to get that kind of reach. And you don't need you don't need to be posting all day every day. It's just
Yeah.
more of like have somewhat of a regular cadence. Post a blog, promote a blog post once a week, publish a picture of your company outing once a week,
Hmm.
do a poll and just try to start building some traction there, because that'll also, in addition to getting your content out there, providing you an opportunity to build an audience and engage with it, it also really helps you practice and refine
Yeah.
a lot of your voice and your tone and how you're going to go out to the market. And you can actually like do experiments to see like what kind of content is resonating with our audiences.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then the last one, sorry, I could talk about this all day.
No, I love it. Keep going. I love all of it.
um, I mean, I think the last one that I usually think of as a really powerful brand awareness channel is SEO. Of course, you can do
Yeah.
things like print ads or billboards, but you usually need you need more budget for those types of
Yeah.
things, and
Definitely a
you
little
need
bit more budget.
a little bit more budget, and usually a little bit more advanced, marketing operations set up so that you can make sure that you have the proper traction or tracking, excuse me, when you
Yeah.
bring people from those offline sources to online sources. But SEO, it's not dead. It's still alive. People are searching on Google every single day, and they are searching for answers to their questions. They are searching for
Hmm.
solutions on the market, and they're searching for you specifically, generally. So I mean, everything from top of funnel educational content, just best practices that can help your audience, whether it relates to your product or not. I mean, obviously, you want it to be in the same realm. I'm not going to write
Yes.
if I'm selling software, I'm not going to write content about how to buy shoes. I'm not fashionable anyway either, so I wouldn't. But you know, making sure that you have a good mix of top of funnel evergreen resources so that when they're searching for those answers, you show up right away on page one search results and people are like, oh, this company knows something that's interesting. And then that's also like how you start planting the seed for the mere exposure effect, because it starts with the search engine result. They go to your website once, then they leave. Later, they see you on social media. Another time, they see you're going to be speaking at an event. So, SEO, it's free. It's another thing where you can have huge cost savings. You don't have to pay for the AdWords, and there's a ton of ROI. So I would absolutely say those are the top three brand channels that I would recommend anyone who's getting started, or even if you're still really advanced in your strategy, something that you should continue to invest in. Um,
Yeah. No. I think that's great. I think brand is getting its like moment it deserves again right now. I feel like I think
mhm,
a lot of people are realizing in order, well, one, like just to make it through a pivot with a pandemic or also break through the noise in this like market, like you said, it
mm,
can be a bit noisy like everywhere, right? Like it's paid ads, it's harder to get people's attention. There's just all these places where it's like harder to get people's attention, but realizing when you have a strong brand and when you have that familiarity, when you're leading with content that really resonates with your audience, like that just makes your cost of acquisition go down. And some of
mhm,
those activities like don't cost a lot. Some do and are really hard to track the ROI
mhm,
on, but I always say like okay, as long as you can, we'll get to KPIs later, but like
mhm,
I think what really brand does is less about like it is about bringing you revenue, but I think the cost of acquisition will go
mm,
down. So it's saving you money as well because
mhm,
does it you don't have to invest so much money now just to bring people to the table to show them your content or bring them to your website and start that like blind date. They're really like seeing you, they're noticing
yes.
you, they're understanding you, and it makes that relationship like heat up, without having to invest all that money ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was just kind of some misconceptions about brand, and I think like this it's probably like a notice to everyone, but I think some people like don't realize like what brand is. Like I was talking
Mm.
about, like they just think, oh, that's like our logo, or but also what are some of the misconceptions that you maybe see like people say about like brand and or do from a brand perspective, and even as far as like not doing it because they feel like it doesn't matter could be one of them. But what do you think are some of those misconceptions, and especially B2B?
There are many. And actually, the first one I'm going to start with is related to something that I didn't answer in your previous question, which is that the company itself is the only one who can be
Yeah.
yeah, the voice of the brand. I mean,
Mhm.
every single person inside your organization is a representation of your brand, is an ambassador of your brand. And so
Yeah.
a huge misconception is that you don't need to be taking the time to educate your company on the brand, on the mission, on
Mhm.
the vision, because the more that you get them familiar with it, the more that they're going to be able to internalize it and then also express with their own personal take on it. And that's where you see a lot of companies who all of their employees are posting either about the software or just about their experience at the company or just their own thought leadership. And so I think there's so much ROI that you can get from both educating people on the brand and then also educating them on just how to be their own brand ambassadors. At Inscribe, we literally just rolled out our social media like sharing process, which is really just like, here are great ideas for things you can post. Here are great examples from your colleagues of things they're posting. And that's how you really give people the confidence to understand like, oh, it's okay. And my company wants me to post for them. And that's where you get brands like Gong or Six Sense, where you see their employees posting their own thought leadership and just talking about how they're using their product like in their day to day, and it's the most amazing like content marketing that you can imagine because it's so authentic and so real. And so employee advocacy is just a huge part of brand building that people I feel like there's a huge misconception that you don't need to invest in it or it doesn't matter. And then of course there's just the general misconception I think that you kind of touched on, that brand doesn't matter in B2B, which of course, we know is not true. B2B buyers are still human beings, not soulless corporate
Yeah.
entities. They want something that gives them all the right feels and aligns with their values.
Mhm.
There's also like a lot of misconceptions that brand marketing is this purely creative endeavor, like powered
Yeah.
by random acts of artistry, I guess I would say. And that's not true either. Brand building, I mean, all of marketing is creative, first of all, but then, and all of sales, I would say too. But brand building is also a very strategic and data driven undertaking. But
Yeah.
then the biggest misconception about branding by far in my opinion is that you cannot measure it, and
Yeah.
that's simply not the case. It's definitely not as easy to measure as other demand gen or marketing programs, but it is quite possible. And I'm excited for you and I, Chrissy, to debunk the myth that it can't be measured right here on this podcast.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question. But I wanted to talk about measurement, and especially around like KPIs or data points that you track
Hmm.
for campaigns or marketing initiatives or brand. Like maybe talk through maybe your structure of like what you actually track and how you measure that,
Hmm.
and what are some things that maybe you do more abstract kind of measurement on, because I think in some cases a lot of marketers, especially in marketing ops, like it's like if it's not on a dashboard, I'm not going to measure it, or if it's not like measurable, like let's not do it. And I think all of these like very finite ways of thinking of like it has to be a
Hmm.
certain way really limits us. But yeah, talk me through maybe some KPIs or data points, and you can use an example of a certain type of campaign or brand initiative, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go through some specific like brand and top of funnel metrics based on
Yeah.
channels and then a couple of examples. So of course I mentioned PR. One of the first things that I like to tell people is like if you put out a press release, a lot of times, whatever newswire service that you use will, something
Mm.
like Cision, for example, it'll give you a visibility report with metrics like total reach, pickups, et cetera, et cetera. And I might get a lot of hate from some PR people for saying this, but those metrics, in my opinion, actually don't matter. Basically, all that's looking at is the number of publications that have automatically published their press release. I'm sorry, your press release on their website.
Mm.
And I don't know about you, but the last time I checked, potential buyers are not digging through Yahoo News looking for a press release
No.
about you.
No.
You should still put out press releases. Each of those pickups, like I mentioned before, gives your website a little backlink juice for SEO. And when someone Googles your company name, it never hurts to have Google automatically like pull in a recent news hit at the top. But ultimately, what you want to be measuring here is placements. How many publications picked up your news release and actually wrote something about it themselves, even if it's like a little news blurb. That's a reporter who saw your name, decided that it was newsworthy enough to actually write something about it. And that
Mm.
also builds the relationship with the reporter in the future, in case you want to reach out to them with other news. And the goal here, like, is really you want to make sure that you're putting out a constant drumbeat of news because like I said, you're not always going to get those tier one pickups, but pickups in tier two and trade publications are still you're super valuable. Your buyers and
Mhm.
customers are looking at trade publications.
How do
And
you typically track those placements? Like, what's the activity
yeah.
that you do to track them?
Yeah, so you can either, if you are working with specific reporters about the news, sometimes they'll let you know when it comes out, and so you can check on the website. There are also a ton of
Mm.
tools that you can use, like Meltwater, that'll track your news placements, as well as, you don't need a ton of fancy tools. You can use Google Alerts. Set up Google
Yeah.
Alerts for your company name, your executives' names, your product names, and throw it in a spreadsheet. And that's an easy way for you to make sure that you're tracking them. And the goal here is like, you know, you don't need to be getting a million pickups every time. You just want to see that when you put out an initiative, you're getting like an increase. You see
Yeah.
more in a week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter increase. That's great. And then the way that you can really pack a punch is if you're able to, tie your PR campaigns to a demand gen campaign as much as possible. So this is less about
Mm.
your
Mhm.
ongoing thought leadership with PR and more about those specific lightning strike moments. So, an example I'll give is at Sendoso, we had an annual report that we would put out called The State of Sending, to demonstrate category leadership, educate the market, and then also generate demand. It was an actual report that you would fill out a form to download on the website. And so for our 2021 edition, we surveyed hundreds of people in our market, combined it with our own proprietary data, and then created a whole integrated campaign around it that included, the ebook itself, a couple of promo materials like a video, but also going out to reporters with that proprietary data as a specific PR campaign.
Mm. Mhm.
So then, after when we go back to our executive team, talking to them about this campaign, we're able to say it's been 2 months. We saw 5 organic media placements. This is earned media that you don't have to pay for in trade publications where we know our buyers or customers are. We got almost 50 organic posts from employees, also educating them on what it is, empowering them with the ability to post it themselves on social media. And then I can also say we got 600 downloads, 700,000, in pipeline, and almost 4,000 organic social media impressions. So there,
Wow.
yeah, so there are ways that you can, you know, of course, it's like it's tough to correlate specific PR campaigns with specific revenue numbers, but there are ways that you can get creative to tie the whole campaign together to say, hey, we hit some of our brand awareness and demand gen goals with this campaign.
Yeah, I think it's key to think about like the demand gen campaign to tie to, especially for companies that are more like really interested in being able to track the success
Mm,
well, because there's that thing that you can tie people to, taking people from like these different sources that you and then bringing them to your site or to a page that you own and being able now to track that. But also one thing that I've really thought has been great about Sendoso, especially your time there, and I'm sure you're thinking about that too at your new company, is just your multi-channel approach
Mm-hmm.
of, okay, how can we take this one campaign, but like really exhaust all of the channels that we have to promote it? And I think that I see a lot of marketers like think of their campaigns as these like really singular
Mm.
activities, and still, even though we talk about multi-channel all the time and it seems very like, oh, it's a no-brainer, but I still see that. And I also think that a lot of the times the length at which we look at the longevity of content or a campaign needs to be redetermined. I think everyone has these
Mm.
like
Mm-hmm.
arbitrary like timelines in their head of like, oh, a campaign can only run a quarter, or it needs to only be promoted once or via email, or our customers need to just, that's old content. And I hate hearing things like that, because that again is like very like finite thinking, and just I think we make things harder for ourselves from a
Yeah.
content perspective, because like your familiarity that you're talking about, I think we think, oh, we put something into an ether or we try and target someone, they saw it. It's like, no, it takes like multiple like channels to try and get in front of someone and actually get them to notice. So I think the campaign part that you said is really key. And maybe on that, like from like a measurement standpoint, like how long are you tracking the success of like a
Mm.
campaign? And because I think that and like what helps you determine, like, do you think it's what helps you determine like how much effort you're going to put into supporting that campaign, or does it always look the same?
Wow. Two great questions. So, first talking about how long are we tracking the campaign?
Yeah.
Another one where it's like there's no hard and fast answer. It's kind
Yeah.
of like I feel like you should, if it's like a larger campaign, I suppose, if we were to t-shirt size campaigns, 6
It's an
months
extra
at
large.
yeah, yeah, right. 6 months at least. But really, I mean, I believe that you should be monitoring campaigns until you just start to see a drop off. And
Yeah.
if your content or whatever the heart of the campaign is very timely, like something like an annual report, then yeah, that's
Mhm.
probably something that we'll be looking at through the first 9 months of the year, because then after 9 months of the year, people aren't thinking about this year anymore. They're thinking about next year. But if it is an evergreen piece of content, I mean, you can promote it for 6 months, let it rest for 6 months, and then promote it again 6 months later. Because I always,
Totally.
yeah, and I so agree with you about how we do ourselves a disservice to being like, oh, we promoted something once, people know about it, and we're done. I mean, I always challenge people to think about themselves as a consumer and a content consumer and being like, look, all the companies you follow, you're not catching every single like campaign that they put out there. So you might catch something years later that they're re-promoting, because we're all consuming so much content at once, and there's just it's so easy for us to scroll right past it. And then
Totally.
yeah, and so then also thinking about how much effort you put behind to support a specific campaign. I mean, I think that kind of goes back to when you're planning a campaign, you're always trying to measure like, okay, what's the input that we're going to put in this versus like our expected impact from it. So if it is something like a large annual report, like we might be investing money in it to work with a third party service to either do a survey or write the content or design it. If there are multiple team members involved, if this is a very cross collaborative effort, that's a lot of like input that we want to make sure that we're going to be getting the appropriate amount of impact and ROI from. So
Mhm.
I would say it's like almost like you want to have, never articulated this out loud before, so bear with me, but almost like a teeter totter of like how much investment was there in this from a money perspective, a team member
Yeah.
perspective, a company strategy perspective. Is this something that is like going to be our market narrative for the year? You want to support it with an equivalent amount of initiatives around it to make sure that you do see the result, because our campaigns need help. They aren't just going to like reach our customers
Yeah.
themselves. We got to help them there. So that's what I would say for that.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And um I think what I normally try and, well, when I worked in demand gen and now working with clients, I think is like a lot of, so, like, certain things are just judged by like, oh, we did this before, or I'm going to do it this way again, and like there's not a lot of like rethinking. But I
Mm,
think, to your point, like, I think the planning part, when we go into planning, sometimes I think it's always based on like what's worked in the past, but I think we want to challenge like what's working, try new things, and
yes.
have a blend of that. And um I I think also challenge the norm. Just because like your
Yes.
competitor is doing something a certain way doesn't mean that you need to try and do the same thing.
Hmm.
If anything, just compare, your own success, and try and iterate on that and get more and
Hmm.
more out of like your campaigns, especially as you grow, like you said, or have more resources, or more budget. But
Yeah.
anyway, I want to stick to this part around like measurement.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think for marketers is trying to get a sense of kind of like,
Mm,
what are those key kind of indicators that like your brand activities are working.
hmm.
And like, what are some of those kind of like key KPIs? Because I think if we go into kind of what my next question is going to be, is like, what are the KPIs leadership or C-suite cares about? I think this is something that like CMOs or head of content and brand like are trying to figure out like their narrative around it. Because I think now CMOs or CEOs even starting to care. They're like, I don't want to be the
Hmm.
CEO that doesn't understand marketing or doesn't care about marketing. I want to understand. So first, like, what are some of those kind of like key data points or even indicators to know, oh, my brand's working? And
Mm.
then how do you communicate those back to your C-suite or leadership team?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, we all know that the C-suite is busy, and we don't ever want to overwhelm people with metrics. So making sure that
No.
you're honing in on just like what are the top level most important things that they need to understand either it's working or it's not working. So I would say like for brands, I usually would recommend that people focus on maybe only three metrics to show their leadership team. What those three metrics are going to be determined by your own brand strategy, but at least
Mm,
for me, my favorite ones for PR is share of voice. How many
mm,
placements are you getting versus your competitors? Like what percentage of the total mind share are you getting about them? Generally, you of course you want to have the most. I would say 50% share of voice is a really healthy goal to work toward. You can also get very fancy and look at things like your referral traffic from PR, but really to keep it simple, I would say like just focus on share of voice.
mm,
Another one that I think is really important is like as an overall health metric is web traffic, specifically organic web traffic and referral web traffic. You
mm,
can get a little fancy there too, and sort of have like an SEO share of voice metric where like how many of the keywords are you trying to rank for? Are you ranking for versus your competitors? But again, I think to keep it simple, organic web traffic and referral web traffic are really easy for people to understand and like wrap their heads around. Um,
mm,
and then social media, there's a lot that I could go into here that is super valuable in terms of, looking at your engagement rate versus your competitors, making sure that you are the most interesting and engaging brand on there. You can also look at, like I mentioned before, earned media value with social media. How much would you have to pay to get that following? But really, for your C suite, keep it simple. I wouldn't even say give them regular updates on your followers. I would say only bring those metrics to them when you hit major milestones, 10,000 followers, 100,000 followers, a million followers, because it
mm.
is it is valuable, but it's not necessarily something that I would say you need to be elevating all the time. Whereas other things like the really high level external brand PR awareness plays are important, as well as like just making sure that people are coming to your website.
Yeah.
Um, and then oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna also you're probably gonna talk about the next thing, but
Yeah.
when you talk about like your campaigns or your content,
Mhm.
and maybe not you probably gonna not go into too much granularity on that with your C-suite. They're probably gonna be looking at revenue in a certain way, but like when you're looking at the success of that, what are some of the like key KPIs that you look at? Because I think for some people listening who are in marketing ops, they're trying to always figure out how can I support my team that's creating
Mm.
content? Like what are the insights that they want to see that and that I can deliver to them? And what do you think from your experience has been like the best types of like reporting to look at for that?
Yeah, so, content resonance. It's so important. It's so important. So, definitely for content that is on your website, you wanna be looking at Google Analytics, not just traffic to specific pieces of content, but time on page. Please look at your time
Mm,
on page. Of course, your bounce rate, but really, like, are people spending 5 seconds on this page and then bouncing, or are they actually is it like a video and they're spending 4 minutes on average on your page? That's a long
mm,
time for people to be spending on a web page. So that's a
yeah.
really high indicator of the fact that people liked it enough to consume the whole thing. Obviously, if only 2 people have visited the page, maybe you don't want to look at it, but really looking at like what pages are getting a decent amount of volume and also the right amount of time on page. And similarly, for when you're distributing that content on your other channels, you can measure things like click through rate on your email. For open rate, it's really just getting that subject line and maybe the preview text right,
Yeah.
but making sure that are the content topics even compelling enough that people are clicking on them to get
Hmm.
into the video or the podcast or whatever it is. And then similarly with social media, I don't really like impressions as a metric because it's literally if you're just like scrolling really quickly, if it passes through your feed, they're gonna count it as an impression, and I don't really value that. But similarly, content consumption, you have to watch like 3 seconds or something on LinkedIn for people to for it to actually be counted as a view. So how many views are you getting on your content on social media? How many click-throughs again are you getting there on your content? And then also again, like engagement rate. Like, are people
Hmm.
seeing your content in their feeds and engaging with it? I think like 0.5% is a good engagement rate for Twitter, 2% is a good engagement rate for LinkedIn. So, if none of your posts are getting above those thresholds, you probably want to reevaluate like what you're putting out there or how you're putting out there to your audience.
Yeah. I like the Mary like how you talked about Google Analytics, but
Mm,
then also, being able to track like your email performance and stuff like that. And
mhm,
one thing that we will work with some of our clients to do is really rethink like some of our campaign structure. So having your campaigns really down to just like the offer or like that piece of content,
mm,
and then having like a strong UTM strategy to actually see,
yes.
what was the campaign or what was the source of like, the offer, like an email or,
Mhm,
uh, you know, from an email campaign nurture or from paid ads or organic. And so you can actually like stamp that on the campaign member. So you could do a little bit of a slice and dice to see, okay, what are those strong referral sources?
mhm,
But especially if you have content though that maybe isn't isn't gated, and maybe you're not including in emails just yet, but looking at Google Analytics is a good place to
mhm,
at least see, and like you said, maybe time on page to really see how much of that content is being consumed and what's driving there. Like don't be
mhm.
afraid to go outside of your dashboards to view that.
Yes.
And I think working with that content person to then decide, okay, if we know what's working well from Google Analytics, okay, let's figure out a way to then disperse that content. So putting that back into your nurtures, into maybe in your newsletters, and that's all things that you can track because you can tie it to the user.
Mm,
Um, but be creative. There's things you can do even on your website for ungated content so you can
yes.
track people's consumption. But and then all of that then tied to that campaign, you can actually see, okay, which pieces of content or offers are actually driving like pipeline and revenue, which is the end goal. And
Yes.
so really I think that's a strong campaign structure because also content's evergreen. There's
Mm,
gonna, like I said, it doesn't just like last like that one time. And so having a place or that one campaign to track the offer makes it really easy to see over time, like
Mm,
what are our referral sources, or how much pipeline revenue are we getting out of it. So,
yeah. And
um,
I love that you mentioned UTMs too, because the last thing I'll say on this part is that different types of content will do perform differently in different channels. So maybe blog
yeah.
posts actually are better in email and videos are better on social media. And then having UTMs can
Oh,
also
yeah.
really help you understand how people are consuming different content mediums across different channels.
Totally. Yeah,
Mhm.
I love that. I love the idea. And I think for people in marketing ops, like this is all things that whoever's like creating the content can do the analysis themselves, but
Mhm.
providing them those insights to look at that, because I think it's always about improving like customer experience and
Yes.
how we can get in more engagement. And so being able to dig deeper is key. All right. Well, we're definitely a little bit over time, but maybe just one last thing. Any kind of like parting wisdom that you have for your audience, or if there's one key takeaway that they could take from this, what would it be?
Yeah, I so sorry. I know we're over time. I'm going to give you 1.5 key takeaways. So my point
No, go ahead.
my point 5 takeaway is like you know, just it is not as easy, but there are so many sources of data that you do kind of have to piece it together sometimes. I'm talking about data from Hootsuite or data from Google Analytics or Meltwater or SEMrush, but be curious. Really, if you
Yeah.
the more you can be curious about data and what's working, the better your content is going to be, the more it's going to resonate with your audience, and probably the more satisfaction and joy you're going to get from your job overall. So there's just so much richness like lying in various data sources that you can tap into. And then my last piece of advice though is, just because you can be measuring one of the millions of metrics that I just threw out in the past hour, doesn't mean you should. I see a lot of teams become so tied to just measuring metrics that they're forgetting about strategy and trying to figure out how to use those
Yeah.
metrics to drive growth. Like I get it. What doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. That's true. But what is over measured, I would say, becomes unmanageable. So find
Yeah.
the right balance of focusing on the metrics that work for you and not the ones that make you work for them.
Yeah, no analysis paralysis, as we
Yes.
call
Yes.
it.
Yes.
There's definitely a fine line with that, but that's amazing last thing to end with. Well, thank you so much, Brianna. We're gonna link to Brianna's LinkedIn in the notes for the podcast, so you can go and follow her there. And remember, she's the head of content at Inscribe. You also have your own website, I think, just highlighting your own kind of content that you do, right, Brianna?
Yeah, I do. It's just Brave ink like pen ink.co. And I write blog posts about marketing and crazy ideas I have related to it. And then I also just share some of my work there. So everyone can feel free to go browse around on there as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, if everyone enjoyed today's podcast, feel free to share it with your colleagues and friends. And definitely hit like or leave a review. I know we haven't sent this very much in the past, but it would definitely appreciate so we could get the word out there for forward thinking. And we'll see you next time. Have a good one.